afternoon. My name is Wein, and I'm here in three capacities. First of all, I grew up in Christchurch, so my first PowerPoint slide was Christchurch with all the dust rising up above it on the February 22nd. And I'm here also because I was worked for the USGS, the US Geological Survey, the primary provider of earthquake information for the nation and the world. And thirdly, I was deployed by the USGS to be in Christchurch for a few weeks in a Learning for Earthquakes program. And there I travelled with, I actually might surprise you, but I worked with social scientists. So we looked at something at the other side of life, from the shaking and the buildings which you've seen here. We looked at three aspects. First of all, we looked at the use of social media, all the tweeting and twittering that was going on around this earthquake. And one really inspiring example is the Student Volunteer Army. They mobilised 15,000 people to move 260 tonnes of silt off the liquefied streets of Christchurch into a huge pile. And this is fantastic that this new technology during a disaster can bring together so many people to help civil defence. The second thing we looked at was risk communication. So as you know, probably, you're expecting the earthquake to happen in Wellington. There's been a lot of focus on Wellington and preparedness for earthquakes, and Christchurch didn't receive the same attention. So there was a surprise of this earthquake. But in September 4, everyone thought they'd gotten through that earthquake. And so there was a normalisation of risk. In fact, some people lapsed in their preparedness because they thought they'd seen the worst. So now we had, of course, February 22nd was absolutely devastating and distressing, and people have now flipped to the other side and are almost afraid some of them are afraid of entering multi-storey buildings. So they have a lot of fears to overcome. The third aspect that we looked at was the disruption to the school system. School systems are really an anchor for a community. 11% of the school students have migrated elsewhere in New Zealand. So whole communities have disbanded, or they are operating from a distance to get to the schools. We also talked with other researchers about our own research activities, the economic impacts of these earthquakes, recovery, the use of scientific geoscience information, and making better decisions. So it would be remiss of me not to remind you that you also live in earthquake country. I have a booth out there with information if you'd like more information from the USGS about the tsunamis that could affect California and the earthquakes in the area, and also the liquefaction. Because liquefaction is a big story for Christchurch. In fact, I think it's the biggest story for liquefaction from any earthquake. And what that does is it breaks your water mains, water pipes and your wastewater. So suburb after suburb in Christchurch is without those lifelines. And I'll just end on the final note that geological time is a lot longer than our planning horizons and planning horizons for our jobs and our lives and our homes. And in an earthquake, you may think it's going to be the Hayward fault because that's where the biggest risk has been assigned, but it really could happen in any fault around the earthquake that we may know or not know about. So be prepared, and if you want more information, come see me outside. Bye.
My name is Ron Mays. I'm a structural engineer. I live here in Moraga, California, and I'm originally from Auckland, New Zealand, Christchurch, where Anne was from. I was on a golfing trip of the South Island of New Zealand at the time of the earthquake, and we had just had 4 days, a group of 22 of us in Christchurch, and then we were actually in Queenstown when the event happened. I got calls from the US, can you get to Christchurch and help out with the assessment of buildings? So I had a really nice set of slides to show you all the damage that happened to the buildings, but our computers wouldn't connect up to the TV, so I apologize. But let me try an overview for you the damage that happened, but more importantly, what are the implications for us living in California? Because the lessons have to be learned. And the biggest impact on me is the central business district. It's about 50 square city blocks. 50,000 people either live or work in that area. They left the day of the earthquake, and it's now 7 weeks later, and no one has been back to their apartment, their condo, or their office. Think about that. Unbelievable. And the reason is the central business district got absolutely munted, as the mayor said. Munted is a new word from this earthquake. I'd never heard it before, but it's a pretty appropriate description of the damage that we saw. What happened is the unreinforced masonry buildings, and if you live or work in one of those, you're in an absolute earthquake hazard. Now, the buildings that have been retrofitted did very well in the first earthquake in September. And so retrofitting unreinforced masonry buildings is good for the Santa Cruz earthquake that we had if you're in San Francisco. But it's no good if you expect the San Andreas or the Hayward fault to go. The buildings, the unreinforced masonry buildings that were retrofitted properly, and some beautiful old structures of Christchurch were done that way. I had photos to show you, and they survived very well. So we can retrofit the historic, beautiful buildings, and we've done a lot of that in the Bay Area, but we haven't done enough. The second class of buildings that are really at fault and really at shock is the reinforced concrete buildings, 3 to 12 stories high. If they were built pre-1980s, about 30% of that stock of buildings are collapse hazards in the event, not the event that happened in September, but the one that happened in February. And that is something that we have ignored here. We are not retrofitting them. None of the cities have ordinances to upgrade those. So we are at real risk. And there were 140 people killed in 2 buildings that collapsed. One was pre-1970s, and the other one was built in 1986. So the reinforced concrete buildings are something we here in California have got to start and take seriously to fix up. And the third was the liquefaction. Liquefaction was just huge. It's sand coming up out of the ground, sand boils, it comes up as pressure. It was mind-boggling. There were about 10,000 houses that were impacted by liquefaction that won't be probably rebuilt. So being on a liquefied area, if you're in the Marina District, if you're anywhere on the edge of the bay, you're in a liquefiable zone in California. And there are some serious issues with the performance of buildings in those areas. So I'm sorry I couldn't share with you the slides and just to give you the visuals, but it was the most sobering experience. I've been to a lot of earthquakes, but because New Zealand design codes, New Zealand construction are so similar to what we have here in California, it's an absolute lesson for us to take seriously if we don't want to suffer the extent of damage that they did. And so thank you for coming, and do whatever you can. The people of Christchurch are the most magnificent people. What they did in coming together after that event, I was there for 10 days. It's unbelievable. They're magnificent people. Please help them today if you can. Thank you.
Stable